scapula. So if you ask, what does a bird scapula look like, and then go to a museum and see a dinosaur, it's just a strap-like scapula. This mammals, especially the live-bearing mammals, we've got a very distinctive one that separates some of our rotator cuff muscles. So so you can tell, no, that definitely looks like a mammalian one.
So it's probably a deer then.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. So just a shout out to all the great bird watchers who were with us. It was Tuesday, wasn't it? We got really lucky. So you know, it's always a great time to go bird watching when there's good weather, and the Liberty Loop is a great place. But when you go to the Liberty Loop, if you're super lucky, you might see sandhill cranes. They keep coming back there all year, but you don't always see them. So thank you very much for our spotter there, and thank you for all of those who were here. So yes, this is what we saw last Tuesday. 5 of them, really?
Yeah, they played.
Wow.
Up from there, and then when I walked up from the there were 2 that flew into it, so there were a group of 3.
Wow. I'm wondering whether maybe some of the young that they've raised in previous years have come here and nested. Someone in the back, and I apologize, I know that sometimes we can't always hear people in the room versus online and vice versa. Apparently 5 sandhill cranes were seen in the past week here. So I've seen 3 before. You had a question.
I've seen them in Goshen.
Have you?
I've seen the Goshen where farmers' fields. Yeah.
Wow. Oh, that's wonderful. Well, so this really is a great area, and I hate to bash any areas. The Caribbean is wonderful. If you go out west, it's wonderful. I mean, scenic beauty. But in all honesty, I don't think I'm being biased when I say that. You often come away and say, but I'm getting a little bit bored with the bird. Like, there's just not the diversity we have here. Like, we really have just an incredible number of species, which can be seen in this area. So that's great. 2 sandhill crane.
Here's a picture from the Liberty Loop Trail from the walk Tuesday.
All right. Oh yeah. So Bethany's showing her picture that she took. Yeah, you were doing some great photography there. Oh, look at the outspread wings that Bethany's showing. That's great. All right. Well, so thank you, everyone. And it was wonderful to see Dorothy here last week. Dorothy is the heart of cultural affairs and helped set this up. So kudos to her and thank you for her. And so happy that she's making a recovery, that she was able to come and see us. Dorothy, are you happen to be here? I should have asked. I don't see Dorothy. Okay. Okay. Well, Dorothy, we wish you wonderful continued recovery, and just kudos to everyone here. Like, I know a lot of people are parts of organizations, the Mearns Bird Club, farming organizations. The Orange County Audubon manages some habitats in this area. The Bashakill Wildlife Refuge is just a wonderful place to go see birds. In fact, this Saturday at 8 o'clock, they have their annual meeting this year at 10. And I'm on the board there, so I gotta go. But I'm going to do a bird walk if anyone would like to go to the Bashakill. So the winery along South Road there will meet at 8 and just take a little stroll. But there will be more bird walks in the future if you're unable to make that. It really is just a lot of fun to get out in such beautiful weather. But you get to meet like-minded people. And I said that I can't say too many positive things about Dorothy. She's just wonderful. Oh, here she is. Thank you. So in our series, Dorothy, I'm sorry, did you have anything you wanted to add? Okay, great. I know sometimes you give interest. Oh, no. Yeah. So as we try to, look at birds comprehensively, at this part, we're just kind of going through the bird groups one by one, and having done aquatic birds and waterfowl and raptors, and going to start 3 weeks of songbirds as of next week. What I'd like to kind of do is what are called the non-passerine land birds. Now, part of me is very happy in what I'm going to present, because if you're a bird watcher and you have been for years and you have a bird guide, then you say, oh, this makes perfect sense, because right after the raptors end, the owls are at the end of the raptors, and he's going through all of them in the order that you would find them in the bird book before you get to the the songbirds, there is a method to the madness. So if that's where you're coming from, you're impressed with what I'm about to do. The reality is that's not the case at all. This is just kind of a grab bag place where if you're not like a duck or an aquatic bird and you're not a songbird yet, the bird books just put a whole bunch of things here that aren't really closely related, right? And let me begin with the big one. So I'm going to talk about turkeys. But turkeys, grouse, and pheasant, they belong to this order of bird called the galliforms. What's special about those? Well, them and the ducks are the most distant cousins of every other bird you see, unless we're talking about ostriches and their friends. So we're not. So if we forget about ostriches, rheas, and the Australia one, the emus and the cassowaries, if we forget about them, then ducks are over here, turkeys and their friends are over here. And this branch of the bird family tree is so old, we think that it started off before the dinosaurs died, which is weird because all of the other, things are much later than that. So no dinosaur ever saw a hawk or an eagle. No dinosaur ever saw a songbird. These are all much more recent age of mammals thing. But there are some fossils of things that look like long-legged ducks that were right around the time that the dinosaurs died out. So this is an ancient split. And so when you take a bird book of the northeastern United States, and like you first get to like loons and ducks. Well, ducks are good, but turkeys are way back nested in it. Turkeys should actually be up front with the ducks. They are less closely related to all of the other birds and then any other lineage in our area except for ducks. There are some groups around the world. We don't have to talk about them. This is an Orange County lecture. But maybe this group just kind of gives us insight into what like early birds look like, as far as getting smaller and good singers and better at flight. That comes later. And so maybe, once again, these are more earlier ones. These are big birds, like turkeys, for example. They can be over 20 pounds, some up to 30. For flying birds, that's really heavy. Are among the heaviest in the world. They walk a lot, and although they can fly, it's typically they just kind of fly to the top of a tree to escape a predator. It's not like turkeys are migrating to the degree. Once again, maybe, as we look at the family tree of birds, flying got better over time. And I hate to infer too much from this, but some of the turkey's relatives are the only birds that don't incubate their eggs. So what they do, and they live in, like Australia and some of the islands around there, is they make a big heap of vegetation, like leaves and all. They put their eggs in the middle of it. And as the vegetation rots, it produces a little heat. And that's what warms their eggs. So as we're looking at just what early birds might have been like, that's just fascinating, that behavior. They're the only birds that do that. So I have a video that goes through what some of the South American one looks like, and some of them are in danger of extinction. But we get to turkeys in our area. So I'll talk about them a little bit. Okay. So turkeys, great birds, and they aren't going to migrate. So they're going to stick it out over the winter, which is going to get tough because, as you can see here in this trail cam video from a sanctuary near Warwick, there's snow on the ground, but they're prepared for that. They can dig through snow, even up to 6 inches of snow. They'll be looking for, say, plant material. And forgive me, I think there's just a little bit background in the background noise. I was going to just mute anyone if that's the case. But when it gets super cold, they're just going to go up to a top of a tree, cluster together, and just wait until when it gets less cold. So they may go 2 weeks without eating and lose up to maybe half their body weight. That's just one of the risks you're going to take if you're not a migratory bird and you're going to try to stay here all winter, even though food is less available. And in winter, they'll be associated with much larger groups than you would typically see them over the summer. So here you can see a big group of turkeys here. What is their color like? Well, there's kind of a tale of two shades. First off, some of them don't want to be brightly colored. So the young don't want to be brightly colored because, as you know, with Thanksgiving approaching, turkeys have a lot of meat on them. That's good eating. And you're not the only one who appreciates that. I mean, so do, coyotes and foxes, and especially if it's a smaller turkey, a number of hawks, etc. There's a whole bunch of things that would like to prey on turkeys, birds which can fly once again up to the top of a tree, but aren't really great at flying. So I've seen foxes just kind of harass a turkey. Well, you'll see turkeys, on a ground that don't have any big trees nearby. And the fox will just kind of circle around it and then dart in, and the turkey will like prepare to defend itself. And the fox will kind of meander away and then pretend like it's not paying attention and then dart in. So if that's, the breadth of the predators you have to face, you want to be camouflaged. And the females want to be camouflaged because they are going to be the ones taking care of the young. So they certainly don't want to be attracting attention to them. So I'm about to talk about some of the iridescent colors on turkeys, but that's not primarily what you're going to see on the females and the young. Yes, maybe out of it. No. Sure. And I'm going to shout your story so those online can hear as well. Go ahead.
Last year on our farm, we had
24 turkeys on a farm. That's a lot. Yeah.
One day, red fox came into the field. He walked into the field. He thought he was going to get some food. He kept walking. He was very hungry. He was excited. All of a sudden, two tom turkeys turned around, basically with almost like this sort of attitude. They turned around. They started to walk towards him, and they were like, "Oh no, no!" And he went from a normal position. He lay down on the ground.
Oh, that's funny.
And I saw with binoculars, and he looked at me.
That's funny. Oh, that's funny. If you're a little red fox, you're like 24-pound birds, or yeah, that's a.
It was amazing.
So two large turkeys kind of stared down a red fox on a farm. That was a neat story. Thank you. If you catch turkeys in the right light, however, especially in breeding season, there's a whole lot of color going on there. A lot of iridescent sheens. I mean, you can see some copper, colors, very, very bright here. And just a couple of things. This is an example of a structural pigment. I mentioned these before. Birds don't make green pigments for feathers or blue pigments for feathers. So if you grind up a brown feather, you get a brown powder. If you grind up a red or a yellow feather, you get red or a yellow feather. But if you do that for green or blue feathers or iridescent feathers, you don't get powders, which are those colors. They just look brown, because it is the structure of the feathers which causes one wavelength of light or one thing of light to bounce off this way, and the other one then interferes with it. So they play with each other in the same way that a soap bubble can do that. Like a soap bubble can have all of these shiny metallic things. That's not a color molecule in the soap. It's just the way that two different layers reflect light, so they mess with each other by the time they hit your eyes. So this is a structural pigment, the way that the iridescent feathers go. But then there's also things going on the head. Turkeys have featherless heads, and they have these growths called caruncles. And they also have something which can come between their near their nose called a snood. And they change their blood flow to that, and that will change their hue. So how the turkey is feeling will affect the coloration of its head as blood, more or less blood flow goes to these areas. One other thing that we'll see on the male turkeys is they have what's called a beard. Some females have this, maybe 10 to 20%, but it tends to be smaller. What it is just an outgrowth of feathers by their chest. So if you look here, male turkeys will just have a little cluster of feathers. You'll see more coming out here that will tend to get longer as they age. All right, so that's another feature. Males, almost exclusively, a few females have this, but it's mostly males, also have spurs on their feet so that males can fight with each other. You see those spurs there. So females almost never have that. Right? So, a little more interesting, when you look at turkeys, especially if it's a cloudy day, you just kind of see brown pigmentation, but, a little more going on there as well. Welcome. So I want to start off with like a kind of a funny story, and I'm going to say this is annoying, but then how happy I am that I'm annoyed. So that's my daughter's car. All right. And here are some turkeys. That's my front yard. And they see the reflection in the car. and then start pecking at the car to the point where they make dents in it and I have to like shoo them away, etc. So there's that, and that's annoying. But at the same time, that makes me so happy because New York State, well, this is just over the border in PA, but New York State lost its turkeys. New York State went for about a century with 0 turkeys in it because A, they were hunted, and then B, deforestation took down a lot of big trees. These are big birds that want to fly up into trees, and so those two things it caused us to lose our turkeys. Pennsylvania kept its turkeys, but really only in the Appalachian Mountains. Most of the state had lost them. But look at how successful they are. Look at all of the numbers to the point where I can be almost bothered by them pecking at cars. I mean, that's an incredible comeback story. They were introduced, the last turkey was lost from New York State, I think around 1844, and they weren't reintroduced until 1957. And so this is a great comeback that they've made. You know, and even both these and mourning doves, I'll mention, doing great as far as numbers, even with hunting. So when hunting is controlled, you know, you give the populations time to lay their eggs, etc. You know, populations can thrive, etc. It's, you know, uncontrolled hunting. I lived in South America for a bit where there's really no hunting season. And so you can kind of shoot anything anytime. And then so many species are just being lost. Like there are deer that live in Paraguay, but you just never, ever see them. Whereas here, there's hunting of deer, but because it's regulated, you know, the deer numbers are thriving. And so turkeys would be a good example of that. Did someone, yeah, you have a question?
They use those feathers during the year, or do they?
I think they continually grow throughout life. That's an interesting, because most birds will do their feathers, molt their feathers once a year. You know what? That would make sense that they would have to molt those, but I've read that they continually grow. You know what? Those would be two contradictory statements. I don't know. I'm sorry. Let me look that up. Yep.
I have 2 questions.
Turkey vultures have that name because they also have a featherless red head, but they would be unrelated to turkey. So no, they're different group. Good question. TJ, you had a question.
Yeah, the first one is you know how turkeys show their tail feathers, like the back ones like peacocks? Is that like a
Yes.
convergent evolution?
Yes, it would be. Yes, because while they would kind of be related, just this idea of showing off the feathers that you have. You know what? That's a good question. I'm trying to think. I don't know, because a couple of other birds, like you mentioned, the peacocks, the fowl do that. Grouse certainly display. That might be something that the ancestor of the group did to some degree, and then maybe turkeys have just taken it to a greater extent. I don't know. That's a
And
good question.
for the second one, could a domesticated turkey mate with a wild turkey? Is that
Yes.
possible?
Yes, they are still the same species. It's not considered a separate species. Domestic turkeys versus wild turkeys. Yes. Also in the group would be this bird, the ruffed grouse. Unfortunately, their numbers are declining. All birds in North America, well, on average, we've lost 1 out of 4 birds since 1950s, but some species are dropping faster. Ruffed grouse would be one of them. Hard to see them, but if you know an area in the winter that has a lot of rhododendron, that's a place where you might see them. The sad thing about those, if you're trying to get a photograph of them, is they will tend to stay very, very still until you're almost, you know, on top of them as you walk in the woods, and all of a sudden you hear this huge noise as they fly off, and it scares you to death, and your heart leaps in your mouth, and obviously you had no time to get your camera out. So there's that. But apart from that, ruffed grouse are known for the drumming behavior, where the males very quickly bring their wings down and forward. That sounds like you know, the beating of a drum in springtime as they perform courtship. Those would be the two native members of the group, but we have one other one which was introduced in the late 1800s called the ring-necked pheasant, introduced from Asia where it is native. I've read that Benjamin Franklin had a son-in-law who thought this would be a great idea and tried to introduce it earlier. There were a couple of attempts that did not take, but in the late 1800s, they did manage to introduce pheasants. So they are not native here, like other members of the group. They're eating a lot of plant material, but can eat small animals as well. So for example, turkeys, they can eat small animals like invertebrates. They could even eat like small mammals or mammals, even reptiles or amphibians. But plant material is most of what they do. In fact, they have what's called a gizzard. Now, I think I mentioned this earlier, birds, they didn't want their head to be heavy because that would make flying harder. So they moved the grinding part of their body from their mouth, where it would be away from the center of the gravity, to a compartment of their stomach called a gizzard. And so birds have gizzards which can crush, like your molars can crush. Turkey gizzards are so strong that they can crush acorns, they can crush hickory nuts, even walnuts. So it can exert twice the pressure that your jaws can. So the maximum force you can squeeze down on, turkeys can double that and can even then open walnuts with their gizzards. Okay. So now we just start jumping around the family tree. So turkeys, grouse, pheasants, they're on the branch that includes ducks. But now we're back in the family tree leading to songbirds, just with a whole bunch of lineages in the middle. So there's a family that includes doves and pigeons. So the dove that we have in our area is called the mourning dove. All right, just a beautiful bird. It nests in all 48 continuous states, as does the flicker. So 2 birds today you can find in every, a landlocked state. And that's unusual for birds. Very few birds, have such a broad geographic range. They care for their young by producing what's called a crop milk. So mammals care for their young. So do these birds, in that the crop, which is an expanded part of their esophagus and their throat, then produces secretions that then the young can nourish from. One of the things that fascinates me is that mammals use a hormone named prolactin to promote milk development. But prolactin's an old hormone. Even fish can have prolactin. But doves use the same hormone, prolactin, to promote the production of their crop milk. So I just think that's fascinating that 2 different groups of birds, have modified the same ancestral hormone for, somewhat of a similar function. Seeds are their main diet, the mourning doves. And mourning doves are partial migrants and differential migrants. So the question, do birds migrate in a species? You think it's a yes or no answer, and it's often just not. One of the common things that is not entirely true, which is why the word partial migrant is so common, is because a bird with a big range has then populations which live in the north, where in winter finding food is going to be difficult, but then populations in Georgia and Florida where even in winter food can be found and be available. So do they migrate? In the north, they do, because they can't find food anymore. In the south, they don't, and they'll remain in their breeding ground all year. And then in our area, very often we're about that cutoff where winters can be difficult or might not be difficult. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. All right, so do they migrate? Well, it's more complex in partial migrants. And then they are also then called differential migrants, because when they start to migrate, the juveniles will go first, the females will go second, and the males third. But the males are then the least likely to migrate. I'm not quite sure why. With some species, hey, if you put all this effort into like defending a territory, like this is my turf, then you stay there over winter and you guard it. That's seen in some other birds. And so if you see mourning doves over here in our area, they're more likely to be male than the ones that hatched this year were females. Now, doves, like their cousins, the pigeons, they like human activity. Like, we've made the world easier for them and they've spread with us. But they originally spread from more southerly areas. So they're not primarily a northern bird. It was humans, creating habitat favorable to them that allowed their spread. So when it gets really cold, they can die. Like they do have a mortality in winter. And, sometimes you can see some which are missing some toes because of frostbite. Once again, they're not, they were originally, more common in southern areas. So, perhaps not as big here. One of the the neat things here is during winter, you can see them in flocks of 5 to 50 birds. And I've read that even though Alaska, they're not typical there, they can actually occur there and breed there. Like it's possible, just unlikely. And I've heard the same about Hawaii. So then, in addition to flickers being found in the 48 continental United States, mourning doves would have one of the rare distinctions of being found in all states. I don't know if you've ever seen a rock dove. Any rock doves? Okay, that's a fancy word for pigeon. So doves and pigeons are in the same group. Rock doves were originally wild birds, but they only lived in the old world, where they were domesticated into the various breeds of pigeon and released to the point where we're not quite sure there's really any wild rock doves left. All right, like we think that all of in the old world, what you see, has been contaminated with genes from domesticated breeds that you can't see, like, oh, the rock dove species before it was migrated. Now, I'm from Philadelphia. I grew up around a lot of pigeons. The pigeons in Quito, Ecuador, are famous in the main square there. So I have some here. Certainly they have been adapted well to human habitation. One of the reasons is they like cliffs, all right, and they like sheer faces, and our buildings and our bridges certainly give us that. And while they aren't super common in our area, you might all of a sudden notice a whole bunch of big birds, especially with some white on them, and it'll be around a bridge, and they're nesting in the under parts of the bridge. So once again, we've created great habitats for them. Now, I'm happy to go on because once again, having lived in Philadelphia, I appreciate birds outside the pigeon group, very nicely. But in all fairness, when Charles Darwin published The Origin of Species, the title of the book meant what it said. He was arguing, hey, a new species could evolve from another population which was over here. Things can change over time. And believe it or not, like his original book, one of the big chapters was on pigeons. His big argument was pigeons evolved from rock doves. And when I say that, there's no gasping and oohing and eyeing, because a lot of us are like, yeah, of course, like, they're so similar. And of course you can produce that degree of change over time. But when Darwin published, that wasn't the idea that was held. This was rather revolutionary. It was kind of thought that nature was kind of set in its ways and would, was at the beginning of time looking kind of exactly like the way it was, and at the end of time would look exactly like this. And the idea that pigeons could have changed from non-pigeon ancestors as more mundane as we might think it, that was kind of a big deal back in the day. That was a big part of his book. He did a lot of breeding of pigeons, etc. So just even things like that, pigeons, for example, the observations we learned from them. There was a gentleman, I don't know if you know the author, Christian Cooper, came and spoke in Warwick over the, yeah, YN7. Magumi, okay, I'm sorry, Magumi, I'll get to your hand. Hi. Fun fact, pigeons are related to the dodo bird and to the Rodriguez solitaire. Cool. Other question, yes, I do plan on getting the hummingbirds. Good
Well,
question.
I was wondering how passenger pigeons fit into the picture.
I don't know that they're a distinct group, but more like they're trained just the way that like certain breeds of dog would be trained to be good with like herding sheep or doing this, that idea of that always returning to a roost. Lots of birds do have varying degrees of fidelity to the place where they hatch when they go back. So I think that I'm sorry. Did you say carrier pigeons or passenger pigeons? I'm sorry.
Passenger pigeons.
Ooh, you know what? I should actually put
The
that in
kind
the list.
that went extinct.
Yeah, I apologize. I have like all these videos, and I often am struck by like, ooh, I should reorganize this. So let's get to, I think, passenger pigeons were once thought to be the most abundant bird in North America.
There are more than 1 million species.
So let me repeat that. They were thought to be more passenger pigeons than any other kind of bird. And in a very short period of time, we completely wiped them out. All right. And so just, a cautionary tale, if we can do that to them, then as we notice all of these other birds that since the 1950s, we've lost a quarter of them, certainly we have to start monitoring those. A couple of things made them easy to hunt, the fact that they flew in such dense flocks that like they could blot out the sun, as literally billions of birds in a flock. That's an incredible number. And in question, if you were asking about pigeons, I think that they would be more doves. So like in the family Columbidae with pigeons and doves, I think they would be more closely related to other things which we call doves than the old world pigeons. Thank you, Megumi. I completely forgot about those. All right.
My stepdaughter used to have pigeons. Pigeons with white bread,
Uh-huh.
cream. He had about 50 of them. He was at the mountain one. All back.
Oh, wow.
They always come back.
Huh. Well, that's great.
Little pigeons.
Huh. Thank you. Just on the pigeons, there was an author who came to Warwick and spoke over the summer named Christian Cooper, who has a big book on birds. But he lives in New York City, and he was talking about, but when he speaks with school kids and tries to get them into birding, he often starts with pigeons. Now, once again, I'm from Philly. Pigeons aren't the group I would start with because, I'm used to them. But if you're going to get, people interested in nature, your comment on there's different breeds of pigeons, they can have whites. Like for those who get into it, it's like, ooh, look at the brown. That's an unusual breed of pigeon. So maybe I don't appreciate it, but there is diversity to see there. And especially if we're getting, people in diverse settings like cities interested in birding and appreciative nature. I mean, they are a bird of North America. And then so, ignoring them as I largely do, perhaps that isn't the kindest thing. Maybe there's, more to pigeons than we could bring out. So thank you. Those different breeds are neat. I don't know why this video isn't playing, so I'll show these videos. Another bird that's not a songbird is the kingfisher. These birds, if you spend any time near water, especially on the Delaware or near lakes, you'll see them in trees. That they make a very distinctive sound that I'll play for you in just a second. And every now and then you'll see them dive into the water where they hopefully catch a fish, hence their name. So if you spend some time, like if you go fishing, then you'll hear that around you. We mentioned the mourning dove. And what a lot of people, I'm sure, in this room know is that the spelling of the word morning is key, because it isn't mourning as if you'll see them earlier in the day, but rather their calls sound sad, as if they're mourning, which is the origin of their name. I mentioned, I'm sure a lot of you know that, but some people don't. And while I'm here, just... Oh, okay, I thought there was more. So obviously, if you can identify birds you haven't seen yet and say, ooh, that's an interesting one, I'm going to look more closely, that's great. Now, there are so many different kinds of birds. Learning birds by sound is certainly a challenge, but a lot of them are distinctive, as some of those are. So, certainly you could get to a point where you can identify a handful of them, and that would give you a foot into that world. So here you can see a kingfisher with a fish. Notice that the female doesn't have a belt, but the male would. So the real name of this bird is the belted kingfisher. You can see that. They have big heads. You can often see them on posts as they go looking for their prey. So in this group, there are some that are coming out at night. So we'll be getting to owls very shortly. But there are a couple others in this group, like this group called the night hawks. Now, night hawks aren't truly night hawks since they don't come out when it's dark, but they do like dusk, like early morning and dusk. In this family tree, the owls are here, and the night hawks and swifts are here. So, there's some nighttime going on here. But actually, the swifts, their closest cousins are the hummingbirds. I'll get to that. So this is where we kind of are in the family tree. So nighthawks and swifts are related, as are hummingbirds. Owls, we'll mention, they're over here. This species is easy to see at night. They have such elegant wings. I love watching them. But white stripes on them, so they're easy to identify. You'll just see them flying around at night as they eat flying insects. They have cousins, which you'll almost never see, but you can hear. There's the whippoorwill and the chuck's-will widow, named for the songs they make. Whippoorwill, chuck's-will widow, chuck's-will widow. So you might hear that at night and not during the day. So there's a couple of members of these insect-eating birds which come out in the evening. And so I have just a little video. So very often, if you're just looking up, especially during migration, you'll just see them flying, and once again, tapering wings with white stripes. They can migrate to like Central South America or even farther south. So they've got a long way to go. So they're not here anymore. They have such a long migration route that they probably started in August, and by now they're further along the way, but they migrate further than most. This is a chimney swift, and they can fly at about 100 miles an hour. Now, if you like peregrine falcons, you may say, that's nothing. Peregrine falcons can go like over 200. That's true, but they're diving. They've got like gravity helping them. So 100 miles per hour in a straight line, that's pretty good. Like a lot of the birds that do faster, they've got some vertical coming here. And these birds probably spend more time flying than any other birds, all right? Because they at night, they'll stop in their roost and they'll rest there. And if they're sitting on some eggs, they'll stop flying then. But that's about it. Other than those two times, they're flying. Like if they want to bathe, they just fly over water and like splash water on themselves. They just never stop flying. They can eat 12,000 insects in a day. All right. And so they just incredible flyers. The name of their order is called Apodiformes, which literally means no feet, because they have small feet that are tucked in. You almost never see their feet. Hummingbirds, their cousins, same thing. Hummingbirds have these little tiny feet that they can't walk on. But they do have feet. Their name means they don't have feet, but they technically do. You just never get to see them. And they'll just be flying overhead. We often confuse them with swallows, but swallows are songbirds that we'll talk about next time. Tree swallows, barn swallows. Swifts are a little different, and they're very fast. So just this, bird with tapering wings. So here are a bunch of swallows, but very often in the midst of that, you might see that there's a swift in there as well. But I mentioned swifts have cousins, and I'd like to spend a little time talking about their cousins. Their cousins are the hummingbirds. Hummingbirds, they are amazing. So just delicately do this. So here, I'll just hold this up for people at home as well. So here's a big bird, this snowy owl. Here's a little bird, all right? Hummingbirds, the small ones, can weigh 2 grams. That's like 2 raisins, all right? So that's amazing. They have the highest metabolism in all of animals. They have the highest heart rate in animals. They can have well over, I'm sorry, I wrote it down. I know it's 270 breaths per minute, all right, which is an incredible number. The pulse number, sorry, I wrote down. All right, so like their wings, like the ruby-throated hummingbird that we'll have in our area, 70 times per second its wings can go. Its pulse can be 1,200 times per minute. All right, so just their metabolism is incredible. Now, a lot of the pictures you're seeing look foreign to you because we have one hummingbird east of the Mississippi River. So if you're in Minnesota, if you're in Florida, if you're in New York and you see a hummingbird, I know what kind it is. It's the ruby-throated hummingbird. That's the only kind we have. But there are lots of hummingbirds. It's only one of a couple of bird families that have more than 300 species. All right, and so there's lots of them, but they just mostly live in South America. I have this one video where I recently got to go to Ecuador and the Galapagos, and I didn't put much work into this at all. So there was a rest stop along the way. So, you know, partway on their way to this one place, we stopped for like, 20 minutes, at a restaurant. There was some a little place where they put up hummingbird feeders. So I took some video. And then at this one place in a rainforest, we went to a place where they feed hummingbirds. I took some video. And between those two spots, I got more different species than you can get in all of the United States. All right, so just hummingbirds are wonderful. They're diverse all over the world. This just isn't the place where they live. All right, so they are primarily a South American group. We get the ruby-throated hummingbird, which is named for the red throat that males have, but not females have. All right, and so these are great birds. While they may use half of their diet being nectar in a day, they also eat a lot of bugs, and they need to because of protein. I mean, nectar is good for sugar, but one does not live on sugar alone, and so protein sources are good. They obviously appreciate our feeders that we put up for them, but there are a lot of flowers that are designed to attract hummingbirds. All right, so when you see a red flower, the flower isn't shooting for bees. Bees like yellow and purple, all right? It's butterflies and hummingbirds that like red. And especially if you look at tubular flowers like these cardinal flowers here, that's made for the long bills and the long tongues of hummingbirds. This group and the group that I'll do next, the woodpeckers, they have long tongues. Now, what I mean by this for both of them, all right, so hummingbirds and woodpeckers. So they've got a long bill, so obviously their tongue stretches the length of their bill. But because they can stick their tongues out in front of their bill, their tongue's actually longer than their bill. In fact, it goes inside their mouth, it goes around their head, and ends at their eye. So in both of the groups, all right, the tongue is so long that it goes around the back of the skull and ends here. And so thus, if you've got a long bill, the tongue can actually be extended a considerable distance beyond that. All right, so hummingbirds will use this to drink nectar from tubular flowers.
That a woodpecker's tongue helps absorb shock from their skull.
I don't know about that's interesting. I don't know that to be true. That is, I know that their neck muscles are, I'll get to woodpeckers in just a second. I didn't know that the tongue plays a role in that. Thank you, I appreciate that. I know that the way that their skull is anchored to the back of their head, and then also the muscles in the back of the head.
I watched it in a nature show like years ago, and it showed that they had several adaptations that helps absorb shock, but the tongue actually does help with that in the fact that it goes around the skull. Well, not
thank you, Bethany. I didn't know that. All right, well,
there can also be a special eyelid that comes up to help protect their eyes from wood chips.
Huh. Well, thank you. Well, while we're on the subject, woodpeckers are the next group of non-passerine birds. And if you're keeping score at home and wondering how many are left, I have heard cuckoos in the wild. I don't have good pictures of them. They're kind of hard to see. And since I'm throwing cuckoos out, the last two groups would be woodpeckers and owls. So just so you know, on our list of things to do this evening. So this woodpecker from South America is doing things that most birds can't. Like it's just holding vertically on a tree. So it's got weird feet. The birds I'm sure you're most familiar with have 3 toes pointing forward and 1 toe pointing back. But most woodpeckers have rotated one of their toes, so they have 2 going up and 2 going down, so that they can better grip this. And their rigid tail feathers also help to prop them up. So just being able to be vertical on tree trunks, that's something that most birds can't do. I would get a concussion if I continually slam my skull into a tree trunk. All right, so obviously, and Bethany, thank you for your contribution on the tongue there. They had to modify their heads, the way that forces are transmitted, so that's not absorbed by the head, but transmitted then to the shoulder muscles and down to their pectoral girdle as they then slam their skull into the wood so hard that they can make a hole. And then once they have a hole, then obviously that long tongue can stick out and can grab insects. This tongue is often coated in mucus and sometimes ends in barbs, so that when their tongue is going into holes, if there are any insects there, they can grab those. So that is a great way to go after insects in general. Ants particularly, because obviously there's carpenter ants that like rotting wood. I'm just gonna, there we go. And I think 2,600 is my number. Just, yeah. That was a pileated woodpecker. One pileated woodpecker once had 2,600 ants in its stomach. All right, so they can eat a lot of ants. Flickers are really big ant eaters as well. Now, these are the biggest woodpeckers in our area. North America did have two bigger ones, the ivory billed, which we think but are not positive is extinct. The last places it was seen was in Cuba and Arkansas. It's possible that they're still around. And the second largest was the imperial woodpecker of Mexico, which we think is extinct but not positive. So the pileated woodpecker would be the third and perhaps the largest one in North America. Here you can see it going after ants. So it's made a hole in this wood. The ants are coming out, and now its long bill is going after the ants. You can always tell pileated woodpeckers because their holes are rectangular. All right, so if you see a big hole that's rectangular, you can say, I know which woodpecker did that. Smaller round holes, it could be a couple of them, but big rectangular holes. That's these guys. Now, what is it doing? Well, it could be making a hole to look for insects, but a couple other things about holes. You can make a nest there. Now, that's special actually, because the hardest time of a bird's life is when they're, as eggs and as nestlings, and there's a lot of predation. Even by woodpeckers. Woodpeckers can go after nestling birds. All right, so they cannot just eat insects, they can go after small animals, and especially they can go after birds' nests. And so in an area, predators often learn where the nests are. And so a lot of birds that can't make their own nests, well, the predators know where to look for you, and this is a tough thing. But woodpeckers, every year, they make a new nest in a place that's never been a nest before. They have a much higher survival rate than most baby birds as a result. So that's another advantage to making a new nest hole that's clean without any nest parasites like mites that might get in your feathers, etc. Other birds, their nest, just are suboptimal compared to those woodpeckers, and therefore going to serve, not serve as well. So these holes can serve a number of things. And then there's this. I don't know if you can hear it, but it's just.
You can hear the drumming fragments.
Any second now. Oh, I swear. So there's another one, and then. I'm sorry. I thought I just missed it. Okay, in here. I thought they were going back and forth. This is also a way of advertising. Females can drum, but it's usually mostly the males as a way of announcing their territory against other males. So like that male drummed, and there was another one drumming in the background. Also a way of letting females know where they are. So just slamming your skull into a tree trunk doesn't have to serve any other function than just making noise. All right, so this behavior known as drumming, they're not looking for insects, they're not trying to make a nest hole. So pileated woodpeckers would be the largest one. Another nice woodpecker in our area is what's called the red-bellied woodpecker. Now, there are a couple of birds which have horrible names, like the ring-necked duck and you would only see the ring on its neck if it's dead or if the sunlight is perfect. So there's a beautiful ring on its bill. Everybody sees that. They should name the bird for that, but it's not. It's named for the ring that you never see. And this is called the red-bellied woodpecker. Yeah, on the belly, there's this tiny little smudge that's like this all reddish. Once again, the bird would have to be dead for you to see it. So it's not a good name. You'd think that they would call it the red-headed woodpecker, but there is a red-headed woodpecker, which you can see in our area, but it's rare. It has that color, but the entire head. So this is not a red-headed woodpecker, it's a red-bellied woodpecker. The males have more red than females, so that's a male, that's a female. So it looked very similar, but just a little difference in the extent. And their range is expanding northwards. They used to be more of a southern bird. The species name of this species is Carolinus. You know, the Carolinas, you would see much more of it. But as winters get warmer with climate change, we're seeing a number of birds get farther north than they used to. Red-bellied woodpeckers being one of those. Right. Will they migrate? Well, we're likely to see them all year. And see, that's the thing about eating bugs. All right. If you eat bugs, most birds had to leave by now. Like the warblers, they eat bugs and they're gone. Maybe, so we might still be seeing yellow rump warblers, but they would be an exception. They can eat bugs and berries. And so now they've given up eating the bugs because there aren't any more, but they can eat like poison ivy berries, etc. Woodpeckers eat bugs, but they know where to find them in winter. All right, most bugs aren't around, but they are still in the wood. So if you can make holes in woods, you can still be a bug eater in winter, which is a neat trick. So the woodpeckers which eat bugs, they're going to stay in our area. All right, so we got big ones like the pileated, we got medium-sized ones like the red-bellied, we got little ones like the downy woodpecker. All right, they can stay in our area. Now, downy woodpeckers are the more common woodpecker in our area that looks like this. There's a bigger one. So downy woodpeckers are around the size of sparrows, and they have a shorter bill, which is maybe a third of the length of their head's width. There's a woodpecker called a hairy woodpecker that's a blue jay sized, and the bill is as long as their head. They're not as easy to see. So if you see a bird looking like this, it is probably a downy woodpecker. So once again, sparrow size, this is not the length of the head, it's a third of it. And if you look closely at the tail, you'll see some little spots, like there's a spot, like they're not really big spots, but that, you know, tends to note the downy woodpecker, because the hairy woodpecker looks a lot like it, but just a little bit bigger and a longer bill. Right. I don't have as good video of that. They aren't as common in our area. Right. Flickers are big, but unlike most woodpeckers, they're probably going to migrate. And that's because they do most of their feeding on the ground, mostly ants. All right. And so, you know, if you're eating bugs, if you're making holes in tree trunks, you can still find them. But if you're used to feeding on the ground, you're probably going to go farther south. They might stay in our area, especially if the winter is warmer, but they probably won't. If you read about flickers, you might read them being called as a yellow shafted or a pink or red shafted. So that one you just saw, the shafts of the feathers are yellow. All right, but I'll leave these up here. They can also be red. So there's kind of red shafted flickers, the same species, but just two color variants, or red, yellow or red shafted flickers. You can look at those. Once again, they would be examples of partial migrants. Down south, they won't migrate. They'll stay in their breeding grounds. Whereas up north, they always have to migrate. And in our area, it could go either way. So even though these are both woodpeckers, the flicker and the downy, the downy's probably going to stay here this winter, and the flicker is probably going to migrate. So flickers migrate, as does this woodpecker called the yellow-bellied sapsucker. That's the male. And as you can see, it's doing something that's odd. It's not going for bugs. See all the holes next to each other? It's drilling into the inner bark of a tree so the sap oozes out, and then it'll feed on the sap. Now it can eat insects as well, All right, but it does a lot of eating of sap. But that now means it isn't going to be able to stay the winter here because come winter, the plants aren't doing photosynthesis anymore, so the sap isn't going to be flowing to the non-existent leaves. So flickers and yellow-bellied sapsuckers are woodpeckers which will migrate, while many of the other woodpeckers we will see in our area. So that was a male yellow-bellied sapsucker, which is very colorful. Here's the female. Doesn't have the red on it, and here you can see the yellow belly there. Okay. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Oh, good. Oh, good. So once again, size being a good way to determine between downy and hairy. The size of the suet of downy, bigger hair. The last group I'd like to touch on today are the owls. Now,
Can
it
I
was
ask
one.
you a question before you move on?
Yes, Megumi.
So we were just talking in the chat about woodpeckers loving the suet cakes.
Mm-hmm.
And the TJ's question was, why would they eat animal fat? Now, other than I don't know the answer to that, other than the fact that it's high in calories. So easy energy. But what
So-
they would eat like bugs, right? Normally.
So yes, although like I said, they are a major predator of nestling birds. Woodpeckers are kind of scary. They can go after small animals. Lots of birds are a little bit omnivorous, where they may specialize in one type of food, but they'll branch out and they'll eat. Like great blue herons can go after baby birds as well. They tend not to. They'll go
Ooh.
after fish most of the time. But so the idea of animal fat, once again, as you pointed out, if there are calories there, it gets a bird through a day, and they go after they can eat a little plant material in their diet as well. So birds can have more of a varied diet, even if a large percentage of their diet is determined by one thing.
Interesting. Thank you.
You're welcome. So it was yes. Sure. The Anna. I don't think I know that. I'm sorry, I don't not familiar with that. There are about I think a little over 300, like maybe 380 species of hummingbirds. It's one of the biggest bird groups. I'm not familiar with that. Owls were once classified with hawks, eagles as a raptor, a bird of prey. We now know that they're not related. They're in the bird family tree, but there's plenty of branches in between them, so they aren't cousins of the hawks. Here, despite these adaptations for hunting. They are amazing. Now, owls can vary. Some only hunt in the dead of night. Some can come out at dusk and even hunt a little during the day. And what I'm going to say isn't true of all of them. But for the best night hunters, if you took an area the size of 4 football stadiums and lit a candle in the 50-yard line in the middle, that is enough light for them to go all around and hunt visually. So they can use light to hunt. They just don't need a lot. The reason for that is in my eye, being a higher primate, I have these 2 types of cells, rods and cones. I have mostly cones, which allow me to see color in bright daylight, but I'm really not good at night. Other animals have flipped it, and they don't have many cones, but they have lots and lots of those rods. So they need very little light in order to see at night, and owls would be one of those. I think a lot of birds, the rods outnumber the cones by like a ratio of like 2 to 1. In owls, it's like 13 to 1. All right, so they've changed the types of cells in their eyes to see better at night. But that's not their only sense, which is good. When you look at their faces, you can see their whole face has been modified to be a facial disc directing sound waves to their ears. So some owls can hunt by sound so well that if there are mice crawling under the snow, 6 inches of snow, they can be up in a tree, come down in the snow, and come out with a mouse. They heard it so well that they knew exactly where to put their feet. So these 2 senses, being, wonderfully able to hear, wonderfully able to to see, that helps them hunt. They're not very good at smelling, which is why great horned owls are one of the main predators of skunks. Like the smell of skunks deter predators as long as the predators can smell. Predators can't smell. That's not quite the deterrent that you think it was. Another great thing about owls, and if you've ever seen a birds of prey demonstration, I'll put these over here if anyone wanted to try this. But some of that is commonly done with owl feathers or a whole wing, if you have the remains of one, is if you have a hawk's wing and you did this, you could hear a sound. All right, if you have an owl's wing, you don't. So owl's wings, the feathers are modified for silent flight. You can do it with feathers as well. Like I've been to birds of prey demonstrations where you take a hawk's feather and you hear it, but owl, you don't hear a thing, because mice come out at night and their whole world is this far away from their faces. So they don't see very well, all right, because vision isn't a thing, but they do hear very well. And so if you could hear an owl flying, then that would alert their prey. But as owls are flying, they're relatively silent. That's another great adaptation that they have. Yeah.
What is different about their feathers or wings that makes it fun?
I think it's the way that the barbules of the feathers lock together and that air flows over them. I'd have to look up. That's the answer I know, but I don't think I know anything more than that.
Talk about the owl's eyes and how they're different. That's why they can see better.
Uh-huh.
Does that mean they don't see really well in the daytime?
It can mean that the same thing with like I'm sure you've done this, like your eyes get accustomed to the dark, and then forgive me, I'm a scout. I was a scoutmaster, so this is bringing up bad memories. Like that kid that just bought the big new flashlight and brought in the camera trip, they shine in your eyes and now you've lost your night vision. So rods are like that. Rods are very sensitive, and when they hit bright light, it'll take them 20 minutes to come back on again. So if your eyes are mostly rods, you can see during the day, but it's easy to, like the same way you would be when you're skiing without goggles, there's just too much white light there. Like you're having trouble seeing at all. So they would be a little more limited there. Not to be insulting, because I like birds, but an owl, like a great horned owl, its head is like the size of a tennis ball, into which it's put two big eyes. See how big those eyes are? They're the size of yours. Plus big parts of the brain to process vision, big parts of the brain to process hearing. That's about all we have room for in a skull the size of a tennis ball. So this idea of wise old owl, yeah, like they've used up most of their brain on their senses. There's just not a whole lot for anything else. So no, not trying to be insulting. So great horned owls don't really have horns. Those are just tufts of feathers. Here. These are the largest of the owls in our area. They can get a little bit bigger. They primarily feed on mammals. Here's a juvenile, doesn't yet have those tufts. One owl you're likely to see more of because they can come out in at dusk is the barred owl, so named for the bars across its chest. And if Barbara is still with us, I'm still eternally grateful. We were looking for a barred owl on an Audubon hike near Goshen earlier because they nest there. We were all looking on one side of the road, and Barbara said, "Oh, I think I see it over there." Just beautifully picked that out. It was so well camouflaged. So we got the beautiful. So this was from earlier this year, the barred owl, and they nest there every year. So if you wanted to just go to the Heritage Trail, obviously nice and paved, and just hike it walking, on the prison side rather than the sanctuary side, you're very likely to see barred owls, especially in the springtime. So that's a wonderful bird to see. But perhaps one that I have, a really soft spot in my heart for is the short-eared owls. All right. So winter is not a great time to go bird watching for a lot of species of birds. But for a lot of species of birds in our area, it's the only time to go. So snow geese, you're only going to see in winter, no other time. Tree sparrows, you're only going to see in winter, no other time. There's a bunch of birds like that. We can talk about that more in other weeks. Same thing for short-eared owls. Like the way how, some people will go to Florida for the winter. This is their Florida, All right, so this is where northern short-eared owls come to spend the winter, and then they'll go back further north. And they come out at dusk. And so if you go to the Liberty Loop, you know, and I hate to say this too loud because the parking was already crazy because everybody already knows about this. Because sometimes it is hard to park, especially on weekends. But on nice nights, like it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon, like there's still sun, and you can just see them flying around. Sometimes it's just as it's getting dark, but sometimes if you're lucky, it's earlier. And they look like the harrier hawks. Harrier hawks do this during the day, and then short-eared owls do this at dusk and at night, where they just fly low over the marsh looking for rodents, primarily voles, and then you'll see them go down and pounce on them. So we live in a great area to see short-eared owls, and they're pretty dependable in winter. So if you wanted to see owls flying around, you know, more likely than not, we did do a hike one night where it was cold and rainy, and turns out they don't like that. But other than that, you know, they usually come out, and you can usually see a bunch of them. So these are just pictures from last year. You know, just beautiful, beautiful birds. And so they are neat ones in our area. There are a couple of smaller species like screech owls that come in 2 different colors, gray and a rusty color. Believe it or not, that hole in that tree was here on campus by the mansion. If you look right in the back of the mansion, there's a tree, has a hole in it. And there was one day where all the students were changing classes and this owl was just sitting staring at them. And I, you know, as all the students are going by, I just got a camera right up to them. So you'll never know where you're going to see them. And believe it or not, then there are owls which can actually get a little smaller, like the saw-whet owl, which can live in our area. This is one that's part of a raptor rehabilitation program here. Okay. So, as I kind of say my final remarks, I'll just put a couple more sounds up here. One of the ways that you can tell the owls is by sound, because obviously you won't see them during the day. So the great horned owl sounds like this. Or a barred owl. So you hear them going back and forth. When males think there's another male calling, they'll say like, hey, this is my territory. They'll go back and forth. And so one of the ways that you can try to find them is to try to imitate those owls. So like if you're trying to call a great horned owl, you make one sound. People going after barred owls, what they often say is, who cooks for you, or who cooks for you all? Depends on how you do. But like if you ever hear someone doing that, they're trying to rile up a male into thinking that someone's competing for its territory. Screech owls actually sound like horses whinnying. And then the short-eared owls, they sound.
Hey, there was no sound for the screech owl.
I'm sorry?
I didn't hear a sound for the screech owl.
Okay, we'll play it again. I'll make it a. Can you hear that whinny?
No. Yeah, I still can't hear the whinny.
Okay, so sorry about that, but you would actually have access to this online. I'll show you. So this is actually in some of the course materials that you have.
Oh, okay.
So as we go through birds, this is such a diverse area. You know, what made sense is, well, let's just split them into groups. And half of all birds in the world are what we call songbirds. And so the next 3 weeks will be dedicated to them. And tonight, after having covered things like ducks and herons and raptors, I did a whole bunch of things which very often are just called the nonpasserine birds, because the songbirds belong to a bird order called passeriforms. And so in that would be turkeys and woodpeckers and doves and kingfishers and owls. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to stop by. I'll push these out if you wanted to look at any of those here. People online, I'll be right back. If you have any questions, I'll hit the lights.
Hit the what?
So thank you very, very much for coming. Someone I think online had asked the next, all these organizations for birding, they do hikes. I try to do 2 a month. that I lead. But at the Bashik Hill, 8 o'clock Saturday morning, I'll be there right across from the winery. So if you look at Bashik Hill Winery, there's a parking area by the Bashik Hill. We'll meet there and take a little stroll. And if not, then next month we'll try to do a couple more. And Audubon and the BKA, they do other ones as well. So if you were looking to get out, there's so many great places to go birding in our area. Any questions online?
Hello, you said there was a practice test for testing out the lockdown browser. I think
Yes.
I don't think I got the right. I don't think I did the right one. I think I did an actual midterm because the way it was structured was as an actual midterm. It's written down as summary -7 owls woodpeckers.